Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Politics of Potential webinar. Today, we're going to discuss how politics do influence the identification and nurturing of top talent in high potential programs. And we are our speakers for today. My name is Andrea. I'm one of the funding partners at Awair and an organizational psychologist. Awair are Hogan distributors in the UK, Italy, and France. And I'm joined today by Maya. Hello, Maya.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. Now, Maya is the regional director for Hogan in the UK and Middle East and Africa. So quite a lot of countries, that
Yeah,
you manage.
traveling up
And
and down for Hogan,
yeah,
indeed.
indeed. And you, of course, do an excellent job at supporting us, and in the distribution in this country. So thank you for that.
You welcome everyone to this webinar.
Now, before we get started, it would be useful to sort of define the key concepts that will be discussed today. So the first one is potential, which is the hot topic for today's webinar. And potential is really a bet on the future. So here we're talking about future capability. Now, different organizations will have a different definition of potential, but it's often referred to as the ability to grow beyond the current role. So some of the key traits that can be used to assess for potential are cognitive agility or personality traits, or you have constructs like emotional intelligence, or factors like drive and learning orientation. So it's important to remember here that performance is not the same as potential and vice versa. So very often the two are confused, and Maya will show us some interesting data on the two actually correlate from a statistical and research perspective. Then you got performance, which is the focus on current results and sometimes past results. It's really how well someone delivers in the current role. You have factors and traits like consistent results over a period of time. You have technical expertise and other perhaps intrapersonal, interpersonal domains like accountability and collaboration. Now, high performance does not translate into readiness for promotion. That's a different thing. And that's the third pillar to the right, readiness, perhaps the less, I suppose, known of the three. And readiness is really the ability to step up now. So to take on a more senior or complex role and have the skills, capabilities required to perform in that job. So what we typically measure here are skills and alignment, in terms of experience with that job, other factors like decision making and influence, or motivation and professional credibility. So in a way, readiness bridges the gap between performance and potential. And at Aware, we actually design and implement assessment and development centers, which are really focused on measuring readiness. And how is it measured? Typically, the process consists of interview, case studies, and role plays. So we observe behaviors to determine whether the individual has the right level of capacity and skills to perform in the target job. So it's really a sort of bet in the more immediate term. Now we'll pass the mic to Maya, who's going to tell us more about Hogan, and then we'll talk about the relationship between performance and potential.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Just a short introduction of myself. As Andrea said, I'm a regional director at Hogan, but Hogan as a company is a US-based company that predicts performance. That's what we do since many years, actually almost 40 years. And we have done so far 13 million assessments worldwide. We do numerous surveys, studies, researches all over the world to try to predict performance and personality impact on performance. I believe that maybe a few of you today are actually familiar with Hogan or maybe even Hogan certified. But for those of you who are not that familiar with us, Awair is our distributor here in the UK. So please feel free just to reach out to Andrea after that if you want to learn more. But today I would like to, with Andrea, take you through a journey about the politics of potential. So let's just start with why do we even bother with analyzing who has the potential, and why do we need the people of potential to be in place? Usually this is because we are thinking long term and we want them to be leaders of companies. So we decided to start with a quickly look at the state of leadership today. There was a survey done 2 years back in the US, which was trying to measure the state of leadership in the US. It might be different in the UK, but apparently 100% of the workforce in the US have said that they actually worked for a boss that they cannot tolerate. Up to 65, 75% of employees have said that the most stressful part, the worst part of the work is actually their boss, their direct superior. Also, about 65% of people have told us that they feel alienated, disengaged, and usually this is because of the attitudes or behaviors of their superiors. And about 65% of Americans would rather fire their boss than receive a pay rise. When you look at that, you may smile, you might think, oh, that's not true, but actually, these are real data. I remember that in that study, we have also been asking people if they ever visualized killing their own boss. And believe me, a big portion of them did. So it's a bit terrifying that we feel like that about those people who were supposed to be high potentials. If we go to the next slide, as Andrea told you, I do travel quite a lot. So whenever I go somewhere, I try to Google what people think about their bosses. And if you Google it, you see that the first answer that pops up is my boss is toxic. My boss is a micromanager. He or she is incompetent, jealous of me, drunk at work. Even in one of the countries that I visited, I believe it was Estonia, people said that the boss is stealing milk or toilet paper from the office. So such crazy things would prove that people observe what the bosses do. People look up to the superiors, but sometimes they get, annoyed, disappointed, or just feel that the atmosphere isn't healthy. I don't know what is your experience, but at least around the countries I'm going, after the COVID, there was a big trend of people not wanting to go back to the offices because they felt more healthy working at home, because they were not facing this toxicity every day. So it made us think at Hogan, why is it? If you actually can Google so much about the state of leadership, we went back to the 80s to the study that has been done by Jon Benz, who is a psychologist, and he had been working for like 30 years to distinguish what is wrong with leadership. What are the sort of factors that can impact leadership to be this disruptive? And he related this to personality. He proved that actually most of those leaders that he studied had something disruptive or affecting their personality. And I want to say that actually we do know what the problem is. So you don't need to read all the books that you can find in bookshops about leadership, the charismatic leadership, engaging leadership, continuous improving leadership, or agile leadership. There are so many buzzwords about it, but we know that somehow it doesn't work. So we ask the question, why is it? Why do we still choose wrong leaders? I would begin answering this question by going back to what Andrea started with. What is the performance and potential paradox? Most of the times, high performers would be those people that you see working hard in your organization, bringing you results. They might be good experts, good specialists, people that you feel you can depend on, count on. So, because they are so good, they sometimes get to be nominated as high potentials, but they might be lacking the personality traits that would actually bring them up to the next level, make them able to be good leaders. So, we have seen that most of the times high performers would not be actually high potentials, whereas high potentials are mostly high performance. So That's the first thing we would advise you to distinguish and look at. If you nominate someone for being a high potential, please make sure that at the same time they are high performers. But watch out, because not everybody who is actually performing highly might be at the same time able to get promoted and lead other people.
Yeah, so basically the risk as well when you promote a high performer who's not a high potential is that you lose a top performer in the role in which they performed previously, and
Yeah.
actually you put them in a situation where they're likely to struggle. So you actually, it's a sort of double whammy, it's a double damage, right? Because on one hand, just lost the top performer in a specific role, and maybe you haven't set them up for success in the more complex role. So we talk a lot about ensuring that your kind of performers don't burn out in
Yeah.
again situations where they're not frankly suited for.
Which leads us to this question of defining potential. What is it? It's not easy to define potential. We like to say at Hogan that the potential speaks about individuals that can become something more than they are at current. It sounds vague a bit, but usually what we do to see performance and see potential, we would like to get evidence. People work in a way that we believe something when we see it and when we see it over a long time. So usually you would need some kind of a track record. You would need proof, which is very difficult to get when somebody's at the beginning of a career. So you somehow have to rely on your gut feeling or data about that person, because the evidence is yet to come. You have to be able to analyze somebody's potential based on what you have at current, trusting that you can develop it, trusting that that person will be good to lead others. And therefore, the politics come in place and the troubles come in place. We could see that most of the problems began with usual traditional talent management programs. Those talent management programs or talent academies or academies for juniors leaders, they still focus on short-term selection. So you invite a couple of people for like a 1-year program, thinking that you can promote them within a year or two, which is a very big pressure, and it's a struggle. It's almost impossible to create new skills and to shape somebody well enough to become a leader, to uphold a new, more stressful position within a short period of time. And at the same time, to enter into the traditional talent management program, you would need to have a proven track record. So this is, again, very difficult for someone who's very fresh at the organization. And then we have more future-oriented strategic programs, which focus on developing people, which focus on long time frame, like 5 or 10 years ahead. And their struggle is, or for the organizations who uphold such programs, the biggest threat and struggle is that they're going to lose the people that they invest in. So I see it very rarely. I don't know what about your experience, Andra, in the UK, but around where I travel, I see it very rarely that actually HR departments would invest or be allowed to invest in programs which take longer than 2 years, just out of the fear that the people will leave the company. What do you say to that?
No, for sure. And it's again another paradox because high potentials are actually more likely to leave the organization if they don't see a development program in place or development journey or career
Yeah.
opportunities. And at the same time, a lot of these programs aim for the low-hanging fruits, meaning, we want observable ROI or success or progress. We want to measure, we want to see things happening very quickly. And on one hand, we're saying, well, you got to make a bet on potential in the long term. On the other hand, we know that the programs are about, immediate ROI or value for
Yeah.
money. So that's the
Yeah.
paradox. But also, we know that if you don't nurture your high potential pool, they're more likely to find opportunities everywhere. Because then what I suppose the high potential also implicitly knows they are high potential. There's something in them, maybe it's the ambition, the drive that doesn't allow them to settle for less. So it's a second paradox in some ways.
Yeah, in a way. Let me get back to this comment a little bit later because that was an interesting one. But when we think of those talent management programs and HIPO programs that I know of, one of the political troubles that I can see is that into most of the programs you can get by being nominated by your direct superior. So it is your manager who has to consider you to be a high potential. Why is this a threat? Why is this biased? We have identified few causes that can bring risks to the programs that let the managers to nominate HIPOs. The first one is that sometimes that manager himself or herself, they lack tools or knowledge to recognize the potential, actually. They might not even know how to do it, so they would just base their judgment on likes and dislikes. The other thing is that sometimes they might be just thinking poorly of an individual, might dislike the individual, and don't promote someone because of that personal feeling of a person. It might be also that the person is working very hard. So you have a high performer and a high potential, but the manager doesn't want to lose him or her, so wants to keep that person close and have the job done and get things done by keeping that person in the office. On the other hand, you might be having managers who are afraid to promote someone who is better than them. So it might just cause this internal threat that I'm going to, let this person rise, and in the future they might take over my seat or something. Also, some people like to prefer emerging politicians. So they like to surround themselves with young stars, with people who can, shine and bring the limelight. And they might be just promoting those who are popular, but not necessarily able to work hard and stay with the organization. And also, let's say, so pay the price of becoming the best version of themselves. Some organizations suffer with managers that actually are not good enough politicians, because to be able to promote someone internally, to actually, support a high potential program, you have to be also a manager who has alliances, who has some influence. If you aren't, you won't be able to fight for your people. So then number of factors that can actually make this decision difficult for managers and at the same time harm the HIPO program.
Well, I would say that our data will support what you're saying. So we try to kind of measure the links between theory and practice. What we find is that when managers get involved in the whole nomination process, which is again a part of organizational talent management life, the data does not support the idea that all these individuals are actually high potentials. And we'll show you some research findings from Awair in a bit. But as soon as you remove the human factor and all the biases, the data gets much stronger. So it's a bit, I suppose it's aligned to what you see in selection processes. So the more you remove the human element, which could be interviewing bias or selection practices that are still built on organizational bias, the more diversity and inclusion, and I suppose, the more opportunities open up for people with diverse backgrounds, and you get, more just diversity in the applicants and the workforce. So there's this, I suppose, never-ending tension between data, objectivity, and organizational bias and politics. Uh,
And something, yeah,
yeah,
called intuition, basically. I have met
the intuition of, yeah.
Yeah, I have met a number of bosses, C-level bosses actually, that claim to have better intuition than any data I was able to provide to
Yeah,
them, which
yeah.
brings us actually to the next slide that talks about the risk of charisma. Intuition is actually closely related to people who are very charismatic, who seem to be, standing out from the society, seems to be, just blessed by nature and chosen among others to lead nations, lead societies, and lead organizations. We have actually checked that among the Fortune 500 organizations, most of them actually employ charismatic leadership, but it impacts their paycheck, not actual performance of that company. So we have been having a close look into the charisma because it's been a popular factor. If you would think of what charisma is, you can recognize it by the sentences that such leaders state. You might be recognizing a few of them. those. I can take this company to the next level. I can make America great again. I will bring disruptive innovation. Usually, charismatic leaders promise you a lot. They promise you the change. They promise you that your life from miserable will get better. They are usually hired by organizations in the crisis times. So when the organization has been losing or losing money, losing customers, they make a mistake by employing someone who promises the miracle to happen within half a year or a year. Usually what happens is that they get this organization bankrupt because it is not possible. However, as humans, we tend to go for such individuals. And Dr. Hogan has been doing a very extensive research about that topic. If you're interested, we can send it over because it's a white paper that we can share. But he was analyzing such individuals like Castro, like Stalin, and other well-known leaders, and asking himself why they were able to be promoted by the society so quickly, so rapidly. And usually he has found that they were having a lot of charisma, which comes also with a certain tendency to manipulate others, to play only to your own game without being focused on what it does to others. We would also like you to think in your high potential programs about something called impression management. This is a factor that actually can be observed and measured, and it's a factor which might have a positive component of itself, because, for instance, you would expect people who are, let's say, so high on impression management, so able to give a very nice and charming first impression. You would like to have them in organizations which deal with quick sales, like, I don't know, selling a car. You want that person to be able to, shine and shake hand and recognize the customer's purchasing power within a minute and close the deal as soon as possible. But for a leader, you have to think twice. And impression management goes together with ability to, promote yourself, promote oneself in the organization. It also goes with the ability to pretend that you're better than you are when other people see you, so you can make an impression on them. Usually, you have to check long term if this impression lasts. And also, how is this person cooperating with others? How is this person working with the team?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to build onto this because I suppose impression management focuses a lot on strengths, right? On the positives, on what we can do, how well we can shine. And it can be very useful in a more transactional kind of approach, like you were saying. However, for many years, people have been studying the risks of accentuating the positives, of focusing on strengths-based approaches. So, for instance, Hogan had done the parallel research to other researchers when they developed the Hogan Development Survey. For those of you who use the Hogan Development Survey, it measures the dark side of personality. But people are very surprised when we tell them that the dark side of personality is not really relating to weaknesses or development needs, but rather it's connected to overused strengths. And that really gets them to think, what do you mean? I'm doing too much of a good thing, and that's, counterproductive. That's exactly the point. But, parallel to Hogan, the Center for Creative Leadership also ran its own research. And it was, I think, 1988, if I'm correct. And we have some researchers like McCall, Lombardo, Morrison. They found that, successful and unsuccessful leaders and executives actually um, differentiated themselves in the ability to self-regulate, to find a balance between the strength and the overused strengths liability. So they found, for instance, that self-awareness and feedback were key to success because it enabled them to know when to stop. And that's, one of the, I suppose, Dr. Hogan himself is very critical of a strength-based approach or excessive positive psychology in the workplace. What he argues, and what we endorse, of course, is that if you just focus on strengths as a development platform, it does not lead to improvement over time. Because what you're doing, again, you're just nurturing the strength, and the risk of overusing that strength becomes greater and greater. And actually, that's the whole notion of derailment. So, for instance, I can be very self-confident to the point of becoming arrogant and, immune to feedback. I can be very detail-oriented to the point of becoming obsessive about the detail and a micromanager. I can be very, if you like, passionate, but at the same time, this passion can turn into volatility and unpredictability. And this is the fine balance that we're constantly working with also in our coaching practice. And basically, when it comes to derailment, it usually boils down to common mistakes. It's about relationships and it's about decisions. These are the core elements that typically define longevity and success for CEOs. And the dark side and overused strengths have a negative impact on our ability to build trust, to maintain relationship over the long term, but also, and I would say very importantly, on decisions, because as you go to the top and your role becomes more complex, decision making and the quality of those decisions really has a real impact on business outcome. And that's usually what senior leaders are and evaluated on, not so much the ability to get along, which is very important, but the ability to make good decisions. Really, feedback and awareness are really, really, useful tools to manage these counterproductive behaviors, to enable the development, to enable, I suppose, also the realization of all that potential, and then you get talent in some ways. Realized potential usually is sort of understood as talent for a specific thing. And again, this notion of balance, which it's easy to get at the theoretical level, but in practice, and we know from working on ourselves, from our own Hogan profile, how difficult it is to find a balance in difficult circumstances. When you're tired, when you're stressed, when you compromise, when you're even bored, it's not so hard. So easy to self-regulate in those circumstances.
Yeah, thank you for this, Andrea. And even before we move on, I was just looking at the allegory with the visuals that you have used for the previous slides. So we usually at Hogan use this allegory a lot, that, developing yourself is like training in sports. And I believe at least a few of our guests today, they probably exercise and do some sports. So think of that. If you would only focus on what's positive, what you're doing good at your sport, you might never develop. I don't know if you ever had a personal coach or a trainer, but I do have, and I'm trying to learn kickboxing. And he's always telling me what I do wrong and how I should do it better and faster and quicker instead of telling me what I'm doing positively. So I think it's the same when you think of high potential programs. You have to be able to select the individuals who are prone to take feedback and act upon it. Uh, and it's again the trick, because how to recognize it without the evidence or not enough of evidence, how to make a decision of investing, maybe thousands of pounds into an individual who might lack actually the ability to change herself or himself for good. So we do understand the challenges. What we can advise you is to maybe try to look at this differentiation between emergence and effectiveness. There was a study done by the same good researcher, Benz, who discovered those 11 traits of personality that impact performance. He also distinguished that there is a group of managers that is usually being promoted very quickly, that is usually being driven by their managers, that is usually also getting pay rise quickly and is being seen everywhere. Those managers spend their time networking. They are very good in knowing, where the wind blows and who is gossiping with whom. So they are most commonly known as high potentials. Whereas he have seen that there is other sort of people employed at the organizations that are actually quiet, humble, a bit more withdrawn, and they usually spend time working. He called them effective managers. I believe most of you read the book by John Collins, Good to Great. So he was also making a very similar statement that most of the best, or those leaders who were able to rise to great level from the good, were those who were very humble, were quiet, were able to work overtime, work during weekends when needed, without immediately asking for compensation for it, just for the sake of the team or for the good of the company. So we would advise you to observe this difference, but don't think that it has to be always one or the other. because some level of this emergence is needed for the person not to be overlooked in the high potential programs. At Hogan, we were actually spending a lot of time and research effort on that high potential problem. And we have distinguished that there should be three sort of pillars that it would be necessary to assess and focus on when you think of a high potential. One is this leadership emergence. So is this person able to actually stand out when needed? Is this person likable? Are others willing to, promote decisions of that person? Is this person effective? So leadership effectiveness, able to work hard, spot the mistakes, also take the blame instead of looking for who's guilty. And what are the foundations, which means core values of that people? Because as Dr. Hogan proves, some values are better than other values. So we would advise you to look for some level of altruism, some level of recognition and power, of course, so ability to be in charge, to take responsibility, some level of tradition, so being prone to protect values that your organization wants to stand on.
And so, Maya, I was going to ask, in terms of this model, is there an order through which somebody should develop those skills? So, I suppose foundations is about getting along, being reliable, having some problem solving, kind of abilities. And without those, we can't go really anywhere because that's the foundations.
Yeah.
Emergence is getting noticed, and effectiveness, as you said, is about getting the job done. So, should there be an order, I mean, for which one should focus on developing those skills?
I think the order should be given by your strategy, your business strategy. So, as the HR director, HR manager, business partner, it would be good to align with your business units on the goals and ask the question, what kind of people are needed in the next years, like 5 years maybe,
Mm.
and why are they needed, what they are supposed to do. So what is this business strategy about? What is the rate of growth? What are the challenges? What is the macro situation that you foresee in your business? And then select the job positions that are needed, or maybe there are new job positions to be created. So
Mm.
I would start from that. I would just really start from the business goals, long-term business goals of your entity, and then align the HR strategy to those business goals. Once you have that done and you have, let's say, so at least a list of the positions that are to be filled in the future, or maybe vacancies that might happen due to retirement or, succession planning needs and things like that. Think of what kind of qualities will be needed in all those positions. Because another mistake is to think there is the one size fits all high potential program. No, it doesn't exist. Only to some extent you would have to teach the same things to a group of individuals. Actually, a good
Mm.
high potential program is tailored based. And you would have to focus on those individual differences on each job position to be successful with it. And for instance, if you have, I don't know, if you work in an FMCG business and you have to have a future director of sales, you might need that person to be more focused on power and commerce and maybe having a bit more spark. So having some of that impression management and high recognition factors. And you might forgive, if the prudence will be low and maybe sometimes that person can get excitable or bold. Whereas if you have a next CFO to come to the position, you might like that person to be really hardworking and not that good in politics to some level, not to maybe, bring a fraudulent charges in the future. I hope this answered the question, Andrea.
Thank you. And I think I suppose we should all remember that unfortunately the high leadership effectiveness can be overlooked, so we cannot spot them in our programs, right? Because most of the attention is taken by those who are able to show up and make themselves noticed. So Hogan refers to the high leadership effectiveness as the hidden gems. So sometimes
Yes,
organizations have these hidden gems that they can't see because they are overshadowed by those who are obviously very good at standing out. So that's a
true.
reminder. Now let's look at the data. So this is a research kind of output from our own data at Awair. And what you can see, the graphs at the top, this is a talent pool that was screened using just personality assessments. So we had a client who said, look, this is, these are I suppose a layer of emerging leaders or management or high potentials. But why don't you just measure the personality characteristics and see what kind of scores they get on these three pillars of the high potential model? Well, you can see there that the results are really encouraging. So the vast majority of, I suppose, individuals here score high or above average. So the organization at this macro level seems to have a high level of potential, good, promising resources for the future. But what happens when nominations come in? So the other two talent pools, the one in the middle, that was 500 individuals actually, and the one at the bottom that was 80 individuals, that shows almost opposite correlation. So actually, the distribution of potential scores on these dimensions is almost negatively correlated to what the organization is saying, meaning that according to managers, these are all high potentials. According to the Hogan data, actually, they are not. The vast majority of participants fall into the low, if not even below average category. And there's actually very few that are, above average or high score, suggesting low levels of potential. And I suppose confirming what you say, Maya, there are other things at play here. There's how much they get along with their manager. Sometimes it's a retention strategy. I don't want to lose them, so I'll get them to participate in this program. I mean, there's many factors at play. And I suppose the question that emerges is how do we counter manage for those, right? Our position would be trying and introduce an objective measure as soon as possible in any of those processes. But I don't know if you have any other tips or strategies based on your experience.
Yeah, a few companies that I used to work for, or like a big a consultant advisor to, they used committees that usually have representative of HR in it. They of course have the manager of the unit, but they also happily have a subordinate representative. Which was a novelty because they want to hear out the impressions of people who could be managed by such an individual in the future. So that's a good practice to actually hear out from different groups of people in the organization and make a more objective or more feedback-based decision. Or if you cannot use assessments, or if you can't, actually use personality assessments, do at least some sort of a 360 feedback, which is definitely more biased than the personality assessment and is more prone to, give you false results due to politics, but still will give a chance for a feedback. It will still be something data-based and only based on a feeling of a manager.
Thank you. Well, I will share that I had this crazy idea with one of our client once, and I said, "Why don't you remove nominations altogether and get everyone to complete Hogan? Then you democratize
Would love
access
that,
to
of course,
potential,
but
right?" And we were really close to doing it, but then we encountered a lot of challenges,
yeah.
as you can imagine. But in a way, there are ways to democratize access to talent and high potential programs, right? But how many hidden gems are there that we're not, looking at? That would be the question. Thank you.
Indeed.
Now we have a fun hypo quiz, which I'm going to launch in a minute, and those who will get the highest scores will also receive a complimentary high potential talent report and a feedback session with one of our consultants. The quiz should launch now. Let me know if you can see it. And there are
Yeah,
four
it's there.
questions. All right. So the first question would be, what is the focus of the foundations component of the high potential model? So having foundations, is it cognitive ability and learning agility? Is it about strategic thinking and vision setting? Or is it about reliability, integrity, and problem solving? Please cast your vote. All right, some people are still voting. Oh, they've gone to 2 and 3. They're too fast.
Ah,
Number two, what does emergence help us understand about potential leader? Whether they deliver under pressure, how likely they are to get noticed and considered for leadership, the technical expertise. Okay. We will reveal the answers very soon. Question 3, what is the key focus of the effectiveness component? Leading teams successfully in delivering outcomes. That's like 100% choice. No split audiences there. And the fourth one, well, you have to guess. We haven't got the data, right? But the fourth one is most high emergence individuals who scoring high on this domain or are also high effectiveness, so they score high in both. That would be the last one. So
There
some
might be
people are
people who
still
read the
voting.
study.
Yes, we would hope so. We're reaching out, making an impact. But while people are voting, I'm always impressed by Hogan relentless focus on research. It's been 40, 50 years. Well, Dr. Hogan has been
Mm.
doing this research at the time where
Yeah.
personality did not exist, and there was a behaviorist understanding of behavior in the context. So he was actually publishing papers on personality, and people were telling him, Dr. Hogan, personality doesn't exist. You're making it up. So that's quite the credit for him.
But, happily he's very stubborn. So
Yeah,
eventually he has proven it does exist.
that definitely helps if you're an academic or a recovering academic, as he likes it to
Yeah, indeed.
present himself. All right, let's end the poll. So I can tell you that in answer to the first question, what is the focus of foundations? It is reliability, integrity, and problem solving. So actually, this was a tough one, and I understand why, because they all seem like, important components, right, to build your supposed successful career on. But I can see that. So it's number 3. Emergence is about how likely they are to get noticed, of course, and considered for leadership. So the majority of you voted for this one. The focus of effectiveness, that is 100% right, leading teams successfully and delivering outcomes, which is taken for granted. But again, a lot of people high in emergence don't want to do that because it's frankly a little boring to manage resources, to manage people. Where is the stage for me? And the last one, it is false. Maya, what's the percentage of people who score
Only
high
10.
on both? 10%. They
Yeah.
truly, like they have the best of both worlds in some ways. Only
Yeah.
10%, right? So we're always
Yeah.
likely to have to develop one of those. So if you have a natural predisposition for emergence, it's very likely that, again, you're not very you have strong tendencies for effectiveness and vice versa.
And another difficulty is probably if you have a tendency to be effective, you might not like to be promoted to a role that requires politics. That's another challenge.
Yeah,
But we didn't,
yeah,
speak much about that one. But I know lots of clients of mine, they struggle with it. How to motivate someone who is actually a very good and hardworking individual, but really doesn't want to become a leader
yeah.
due to, the necessity of pressures and politics.
Yeah, and getting, I suppose, on a stage and the spotlight may not be actually something
Yeah.
that motivates this high
Yeah.
effective individual, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Now,
Um,
it's time for Q&A. We got lots of questions in the chat. Do organizations and order managers see psychometrics for potential as a threat to the culture and maybe to their ego? The managers know better the stuff or know better the stuff better than an assessment. Yes, typical situation. What's your take, Maya?
Matthew, thank you for this question. I'm worried that you might be having some experience with very charismatic leaders who are born with this amazing intuition, and that's why data is a threat to them. But yeah, it happens, of course, that psychometrics is being seen like a magic crystal ball, and people would feel that they, don't need this, that their business experience is enough to serve them well for decisions. And maybe for some it is, but actually, there's always my advice comes to empowering your HR people to become more strategic advisors to their internal clients, empower them with tools, with data, with research, and over the time, make them able, to do a little. Usually, when I face such opposition, I start very small at the organization. I have just few people assessed. I bring the data and try to make people swallow it. The lesson I learned from Dr. Hogan, and that was a long time ago when I was a distributor myself here in Poland, because I'm Polish. I got certified with Hogan and I learned so much about it. So I was amazed and happy, and I wanted to bring a lorry of truth, like a full truck of truth to my clients. And Dr. Hogan told me, Maya, just hold on. Nobody likes the truth. Take a teaspoon, take a teaspoon of what you know from the reports and bring that teaspoon to the methane and see if they can swallow it. And that was a great lesson because, we always assume that people do want to know the truth and data where actually they don't. The other thing is, Matthew, to this question, you might like to look at our other tool, which is called Judgment. It gives you insight to how people react to bad news. Most of people become very defensive and they want to neglect the bad news. It's like this, kill the messenger, but do not hear the news. So, yeah, I know those threats, but my kind of a track record proves that if you start little and bring that data, eventually you will find a sponsor in the organization. How about you, Andrea? What do you
Uh,
think of that?
Yeah, very often depends on the level of maturity they have around psychometrics, also understanding of what they are, what they measure, and kind of openness to being challenged. So as you said, sometimes it's the culture of not challenging decision makers, in which case, yes, the psychometric will be perceived as a threat to their judgment.
Yeah.
But I also say as well, but look, if the psychometric always confirmed what you thought about a colleague, a candidate, or any kind of idea or evaluation that you had, there would be no point in using them, right? What value would psychometrics add if they always agreed with you? The real value of psychometrics is when they're not aligned with your perception of somebody. Then you get something new, an element that you can incorporate. So I would say you'd be just wasting money basically if the psychometric always agree with you. But definitely you have to check for the level of maturity and openness to this kind of data and driven decision making. The last thing I usually say is that psychometric should not replace your make a decision for you. It should help you make a more informed decision, right? So you integrate as much data as possible to gain a full picture about somebody. So there's different angles, but I definitely agree with you. Less is more. If you go on with a full sort of scale of what you could measure and all the cool things you can do, for some audiences it can be too much for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now we got another question. I'm going to try and project it live. How do you see leadership style evolving to bridge the gap between the traits that propel leaders to emerge in the past, like command presence and top-down authority, and the qualities we value in emergent leaders today, such as empathy, adaptability, and collaborative influence? What practical steps can organization take to foster this more holistic leadership style?
That's an interesting question. I think I would argue a little bit that empathy falls into emergent factor. I don't think so. I think empathy would actually fall into being more altruistic and also being more sociable and having a higher interpersonal sensitivity, which comes together with being focused on other people's goals as well and other people good as well. Whereas emergence is usually related to being concentrated on your own benefit, on your own way forward. So I don't really think that the modern way of being seen is so much close to what we call emergent. Emergent for us is somebody who stands out very quickly, rapidly, and is short-term focused. When I think people who are more prone to feel empathy and adaptability and be collaborative will be focused on getting along with others more and changing things together instead of changing things on their own. So that's also a big differentiating factor. I've seen that someone was asking for that research that we done about the charisma, and this particular bit is also covered by that research. There is something that Dr. Hogan has developed, which is called a toxic triangle, and it talks about, the charismatic leader, the society implications that must happen for this charismatic leader to get power, and also the groups of followers that usually are there in every organization or society that are prone to follow that charismatic emergent leader. So I think, Andrea, we can just share that paper because I believe
Of
it will
course.
give some more insight to this question. I don't know if you want to comment more on that.
No, I think we can actually tie this in with Ben's question. In the
Yeah.
USA these days, politics is now a factor in addition to organizational politics. How can we ensure as much fairness and accuracy in assessing people in the current environment? I suppose it talks a
Mm.
lot about role modeling as well, when we see what type of, traits in a way seem to be more successful than others these days.
Yeah, well, indeed, it is very popular that politics is a huge a game changer now, and I would be even more prone to recommend you using good psychometrics to become more objective and inclusive. At Hogan, we spent lots of hours to make sure that our assessments are free of bias towards, race, religion, society status, and things like that, to make the
Even age,
questions, yeah,
even age, right?
age,
Yeah,
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 gender,
yeah.
all of that. So we do, we study our items, we change them, we measure how they reflect cultures and languages to bring accuracy to our results and definitely avoid biases which come with political choices. However, I'm not naive that much to believe that we can avoid politics in decision making altogether if we use psychometrics. I know we cannot, but at least it gives you some power, so some argument in the discussion whenever you have to make those hard decisions related to promoting someone for political reasons. Or if you have to, because in my career, I also had to. There was a time I was working for an oil and gas company, which has been state owned. And as an HR director back then, I had to make a lot of politically biased decisions, obviously, but at least I knew the risks that I'm
Mm,
taking. At least I
thank you.
had the data to know, oh, what's going to be the price I pay if I do that.
Yes, if I do.
So,
Well, you're referring a little bit to culture as well in context, I
yes.
suppose we have time for one more question, and I'm going to answer live. By the way, if we don't answer your question here, we'll write to you or the group separately, so don't worry, we recorded all of them. Now, this one is about, culture and context, which is very important because in some cultures where I worked, I would say mostly in finance, you get a huge majority or prevalence of emerging individuals, people will score high on emergence. Maybe in the public sector is less so. So there are definitely differences. So if
Yeah.
you're someone who values being an effective leader and less concerned with charisma, what are some tips for navigating a culture where most others seem to be more on the charismatic side? How do you get noticed and or
Mm.
assimilate?
Oh, my, Ryan. Change the job. That would be my very honest answer because, as our CEO Wendy Hogan says, sometimes to change people, you have to change people or change your job. But if you are, focused on staying there, probably what I would do, I would go for some good public speaking and negotiation skills building training, because to be able to stand out and influence others and negotiate internally or build alliances, you got to learn behaviors that are usually accustomed with people who are good speakers, who are good negotiators, good influencers. So basically, I could recommend you such a training just to learn a few tricks and those behaviors. Sometimes, yeah, a long time ago, I got that advice from a boss of mine. because I tend to be very intimidated when someone behaves very bold, and I never knew how to cope with it. And he told me, mirror it, behave the same, but do it sharper. So I think that's a good advice in these circumstances as well. Try to mirror these behaviors. So you might just learn from this environment. Andrea?
I would say focus on opportunities that might open up, and maybe you can, in this scenario, I'm not saying it's here I am, but in this scenario, the individual can really put an extra effort to seize an opportunity. Because when you look at a book from good to great, and the great leaders that were described, and illustrated in the book, they got to their position by chance. It's because their successor died. Sorry,
Yeah,
the predecessor died
yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
So they were fantastic leaders, but they ended up in those positions purely by chance, and they were never given the chance. They would not have been given the chance,
Mm,
with other emerging individuals. So if there's an opportunity arises, be prepared to fight with the emergently, kind of
yeah.
charismatic
Go and
individual.
get it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go and
that's
get
a
it,
very good point.
yeah, and it could
But
be a short-term strategy that could work. Then to build
yeah,
your own team and your own kind of microculture. But it's tough to navigate a culture when the majority, of course, tend to
yeah.
go the other way.
And just ask yourself a question if you really want to assimilate with that, because it
Yeah,
might be
well,
that you
that's the other
have
thing.
just conflict based on values with the group.
Yeah.
And values are those factors in our personality that rather won't change. They are being created until we are 15 years old, so very early in life. And they likely never change, a little bit when we age, but not much. So if you have, a mismatch in values with the place that you work for, you better find a better match, basically.
For sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maya. We reached the end. It's a shame because I think there's so much to talk about. Well, we have a final request for the group. Hogan is conducting an international research project on the definition how different countries perceive leadership effectiveness differently. So there's a great opportunity here to participate. So if you point your phone now or later when we send you the slides to the QR code, you will be able to access the survey, right? Anything you'd like to say about this, Maya?
Yeah, we are trying to distinguish what are differences in perception of leadership effectiveness across the globe. So we are doing this research until the end of May, and we'll be delivering you data on the UK market, on what it means for the people who are working and living within the UK, what are the factors that are associated with the leadership effectiveness. That survey should not take you long. I think it's like 20, maybe 25 minutes. And by the end of it, when you will send a screenshot to Andrea and Awair, you will be entitled to get a career report, which is HPI Hogan Personality Inventory based report. You will be entitled to get it for free. So just get some taste of what we do at Hogan and also what we can help you with.
That's great. So please join and participate. Again, Hogan is always looking to research these hot topics. And we praise Hogan for again, as I mentioned, the relentless effort on research and validating, this beautiful and powerful psychometrics. So thank you all for attending. Thank you again, Maya, for being here today with us.
Thank you.
Stay in touch. These are our contact details. Any questions, comments, and we'll send a copy of the recording and we'll answer your questions as well directly if you're not anonymous. Yeah, I'll see you at the next webinar.
Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. Bye.
Bye, everyone.